So again, thanks for coming. And wasn't that a fantastic performance? Incredible. Even 25 years later, and it's also beautiful to see just the streaming of the end of the videotape, right? These kind of cosmic rays that end, and that's all what we see, little specks of lights and sounds. But maybe just let's go directly to Gary. What comes to your mind when you see this? And you said you never saw the video.
I don't think anybody saw it, or very few people saw it. It was just, they just made it to have a record of it. What I kept thinking is that you could shoot it on an iPhone now, and it would be a million times clearer than. But it has its own aesthetic. One of the best things that I continue to show people, even though is something that Vincent Fremont shot for Andy Warhol in 1974 with Charles Rydell and Bridget Berlin, called Fight. And it was just an improvisation. And I mean, it was shot in a very early Portapak. And when you see it now, you can see that when the camera pans, if it passes across a light source, then this big streak just goes. I don't know. I would have still. Well, I don't know. I would have. It would be nice to see it enhanced, maybe. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I like the technology we have now a lot better than what we had then.
Oh, thanks. Greg, tell us a bit about how did it all get together? What was the story of it?
Well, Jack Smith died, and Ron was something a little more than an acquaintance, not really a close friend, but enough to have visited Jack a few times and gone to some of his performances. And as he said, it was part of this whole world, but a very small world of avant-garde theater makers at the time. And so he wanted, but Jack, at that time was almost completely unknown. I mean, almost forgotten, as he talks about in his work. I mean, if you said Jack Smith to even theater people, very few people knew who he was. So Ron wanted to do something to, memorialize him. So he talked to Penny Arcade, who was the executor of the Jack Smith estate, and came up with that tape, What's Underground About Marshmallows. And as Ron said, Jack Smith's performances could be up to 9 hours. So the first thing was what he said. He went to Amsterdam. He was performing with the Wooster Group. And so on his off hours, he took those slides. And then he came back here, and I think the first thing was we went to the Walker Arts Center. They, brought us there to work on it. And so he performed the Jack Smith part. At that time, it was in a big boat. We constructed this boat, like a big rowboat. And like in one of the movies, I think it's Alibaba, isn't it? Where he goes across the Red Sea or something. Anyway, it was all this boat, and there was all this treasure and all the jewels and everything, and all these chests of jewels. And so we did that, and but it was, I think it was about an hour then. And Ron was like, it's not enough. It needs a companion piece. So then we came up with the idea of Roy Cohn. I had been reading all this stuff about Roy Cohn. And as opposed to Jack, we wanted to do something that was opposite of Jack. Roy Cohn was very well known. He was, you know, he was like Donald Trump now, and as you probably know, he was Donald Trump's mentor. He was on at the Post. He went out with Barbara Walters all the time. I mean, he was a big New York person, and he was very good friends with Cardinal Spellman and, you know, like Kitty, all the big people. And so anyway, came up with the idea of Roy Cohn, and then I happened to read in this biography of him about how he had made that speech he talks about. But we tried to find it. Marianne Weems was our dramaturg, and we tried to find some record, but we couldn't. So then I thought of Gary, because I admired Gary's writing so much, and I wanted to do something that was very political. Because Jack was like totally non-political. He never mentioned anything political. It was like he wasn't even living in our present world. He really was living in this kind of Hollywood, you know, exotica fantasy world. So, then Gary started. I told him the idea, like what would the speech might have been like, but as a kind of, you know, satire. And Gary wrote that, and then I wanted it to match in the time, roughly. So we did a lot of editing. You know, Gary's speech was originally much longer. But we went to Los Angeles to the MoCA, Museum of Contemporary Art, and we did it there, a kind of work in progress. Also, people I kept saying, you know, this is a theater, but everyone kept thinking, oh, it's, you know, it's not like a regular play, so they would put it in these like art spaces. So anyway, it was there at MoCA, and
Wasn't there a radio version of it?
when we were at MoCA, Julie Lazar, who was the programmer there, hired some people, and they did they taped Roy Cohn part, just Roy Cohn, because Jack Smith wouldn't, just by the audio, wouldn't be enough. So, yeah, and I have copies of that, and I forget who, there were some other artists too, but it was like they had like a radio program. So anyway, we did it there, and then I think that was it, and then we did it here at the Performing Garage. And then subsequent to this, at the Performing Garage, we went on tour to Europe, and we did it in Amsterdam, in Brussels, in Berlin, in London. I think that was it. And then, less than 2 years later, Ron always wanted a film to be made of it. This Jack Smith was never recorded.
What am I saying, Jack Smith? Roy Cohn.
Yeah, they did the Roy Cohn,
And there was.
and then they sped it up,
Yeah.
which, so then I was just like, ugh. But
Yeah, I just remember getting.
they were like, oh, it
something-
can't be that long, and it won't be 30 minutes. And I was like, and they were like, well, I don't want to cut it. And so then they were like, well, we'll just make it faster.
Well, I don't know, but the Roy Cohn part of this seemed to me kind of sped up, like part of it.
This?
Yeah.
No, this is the real performance.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't.
But it
do anything.
seemed like, I don't know, it seemed like it was, I couldn't understand.
Yeah, no, he went really fast.
Yeah.
The sound's not so great on this.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
In the theater, I think you could understand it.
Yes, you could, but,
Alisa, I think it's also, of course, a play of its time, of the AIDS crisis, at the end perhaps also of something that happened in New York. But so what do you think that fits all in, and how do you see the work?
Wow. That's a big question. I mean, first I just have to say how emotional it is to see Ron, you know? I just need to say that. I mean, it's just really intense and beautiful and heartbreaking, and as the piece was at the time. So this was, what year was this?
92.
So by then, you know, we're already into a kind of second phase of theater pieces dealing with AIDS. This is when I wish David Román was here, because he's really an expert on the theater about AIDS. I mean, I miss him for other reasons too. So I guess, you know, to make a really, to paint it with a very broad brush, because I'd say like early in the epidemic we had, or the things that were most visible were pretty straightforward narrative dramas, like I guess The Normal Heart was the first major one, sort of agitprop-y, powerful piece of work by Larry Kramer. And As Is, William Hoffman's play, realistic drama about a man and his partner dealing with one of them dying. And by this time, 92, I mean, it's an interesting moment. I mean, for one thing, there, you know, Roy Cohn was all over in a way. I mean, there was that Citizen Cohn, is that what it was called?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that had just come out, and Angels in America came out around the same time.
Exactly the same time.
You know, with the Roy Cohn character. And I guess the other things that were happening around that time, Ron Athey's work, performance work, dealing, you know, with AIDS in a very different kind of way. Hotkeys had started around then, Jeff Weiss's great serial drama. That was indirectly but unmistakably dealing with AIDS in this incredible combination of cheeriness and mean-spiritedness was kind of great. But I think this piece maybe commenting on that through these other characters. But it's interesting that he didn't want to be interviewed or made into, you know, that he didn't want to put himself forward in that particular
Right, and
biographical
I just
way.
want to say that we went to see all those plays,
Uh-huh.
and as you can imagine, probably Ron wasn't too fond of them, and didn't want to make any kind of normal play about, you know, AIDS. That's not what he was interested in. So it was in some ways a reaction, just like the work of the Wooster Group and many other people is in some ways a reaction against the regular commercial theater that was
Yeah.
and is all around us.
And yet, I wonder, maybe you could talk a little bit about acting. When I think, I mean, you know, Ron didn't work only with the Wooster Group. He worked with Mabou Mines and other projects. But I think that the nature of the performance in Roy Cohn, Jack Smith is very different from the nature of the kinds of ways he would be on stage in the Wooster Group.
Yeah, it was different, and you know, that was a process. One of the things I remember, he didn't want to have any accents. He was very like insistent. I don't want to imitate them. And at a certain point, I said, well, you just have to have the Bronx accent. You just have to, for Roy Cohn. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense if you don't. And so, of course, he, I think, gives a brilliant. I mean, he's not, doesn't, as he said, he's not sound exactly like Roy Cohn, but the interior, what I noticed this time more than sometimes other, I've only seen it one other time since 25 years ago. And what I'm so impressed by, I'm an actor myself and in rehearsal right now, so I could use some of this, is his ability to instantly change from something really funny and technically brilliantly timed and everything to something deeply tragic and still and interior. But without, you know, pointing at it or, you know, how actors can be, without showing off really, except it is a kind of even more showing off.
Yeah.
Because it's just so virtuosic.
Well, that's one of the things that's so great about the contrast in the pieces.
Right, and then when you
because-
see that, you're like, I can't even believe it's the same person.
Yeah.
I mean,
But also that it is a very interior, you know, the Roy Cohn is very interior, and maybe that's the word I was looking for in contrast to other work of Ron's that I saw over many years. And then, you know, and then to contrast that with the onion scene, which is a masterpiece just in and of itself, those 3 minutes, whatever they are, of...
well, the other thing is that very Wooster Group, he's actually listening
Right.
to an edited tape of Jack Smith. And if you listen very closely at the very end of the piece, you hear Jack Smith's voice. And so for that part, because he wanted to do this homage to Jack, he very consciously tried to sound exactly like what was in his ear, Jack's real voice. And because he had seen his performances, his performance style was, even though it wasn't 6 hours long, I think it gave a good impression, like you're like, what is, you know, it has such a different attitude about time on the stage and what an actor can and can't do and all that stuff, which he just breaks every rule there ever it was. And I think he captured that so well by just, you know, it would drive me crazy, but I would just be like, he's like, no, you know, we have to wait. We have to, you know, and I was like, well, what are we waiting for? But my favorite is like about when he says, that was in the early 60s. And then you can just, he doesn't do anything, but you can just see like the whole early 60s. It's like, all right, and then he comes back and he's so sad. It's like, oh, it's not the early 60s anymore.
Could you say something about, sorry,
No,
about
Gary.
the pauses in Roy Cohn, those two, because I'm just thinking of them as what you said about the time and the tempo.
Well,
in
you know,
Jack
a
Smith.
speech is like, I was just like, enough already with, you know, Roy. And I mean, it's great, but, you know, there was, plus just practically for the actor, it was very tiring because it's so intense. And so I made those pauses. And I remember he was like, well, what am I going to do in the pause? And I said, don't do anything. And I used the image of Greta Garbo at the end of Queen Christina, where she's just looking. And I had read this, I always read biographies. I read this biography of her. And the director, Ruben Mamelians, she asked the same question, well, what do I do? And he said, don't do anything, just look. So that's what he did. And then I said, well, look at the audience. So when he's looking out, he's looking right at the audience. And it also gave him a chance to sort of, you know, compose himself and get ready. Because it was, as you can imagine, quite a workout, especially for someone who's ill.
Yeah. I think when I saw the Berlin performance at the Hevel, he was no longer as strong, I think, as a
Right.
performer.
No.
But a question to Gary: did you work with Ron on the text? Was it or did you just deliver it, or it was so longer? How did it work out to get your text right?
We actually got a lot of kinescopes or old. We tried to get like documents of
Interviews with him.
appearances and interviews so that I could get Roy Cohn's vocabulary down and also a little bit the rhythms that he spoke in. And he had also, there was like 3 or 4 books that he had ostensibly written or had written for him. So, you know, we all read all of that. And no, I mean, I made it up, and I got really pissed off when the New York Times reviewed the play and said I had made like a collage of things that Roy Cohn had said. He'd never said anything that was in that speech.
Cohn actually was quite, I mean, he was smart, and he could, in that really mean way, he could be really funny. And he was also very skilled at presenting himself in public. So like in all these interviews, he would say funny things, and he did talk just like, I mean, he talked really fast,
Yeah.
and he would mention, name drop constantly, and, you know, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was fun to do, but I'm sure that's because he was dead. Which would not be the case if you were trying to do something with Donald Trump. But
The good thing he was dead, or he would have sued you.
oh yeah, no, he would sue you for anything.
Yeah, I think that in
And that's where Trump learned everything was from
Sing-
him, basically.
this latest Vanity Fair portrait of Roy Cohn, they claimed for a long time they spoke daily, Trump and Cohn, and it was one of he really was his mentor, Mephistopheles, in a way.
No, he was. Roy Cohn told him, you know, I mean, Roy Cohn connected him with all these mafia people, for one thing. You know, that's how all the Trump buildings got built. And, but he taught him, like, don't ever apologize for anything and don't ever back down.
Always fight
Somebody attacks you, you go back twice as hard. And that's what Roy Cohn did. I mean, he was one of the originators of the frivolous lawsuit that could bankrupt somebody that he was, you know, pulled into litigation that was frivolous, essentially, and without foundation, but would bankrupt the people that he went after. I mean, and we just live in the debris of Roy Cohn, and that weasel in the White House. Stephen Miller, I think, was the other protege of Roy Cohn. Oh, no, Roger Stone.
Oh, yeah.
Roger Stone.
Yeah.
But that weasel looks just like him. Stephen Miller looks exactly like Roy Cohn. He's like he was cloned from him.
I just want to recognize Pedro Juan Rosado, Chico.
Maybe put some light on the audience, if possible.
Is there anyone else in this room who was involved in the original production? No? Anyway, but there are several people here, many people probably, who also worked with Ron, and we wanted to open it up Well, Lee Brewer is here. He directed Ron in Lear. Do you want to say something, Lee? Have anything to contribute?
So yeah, we have a microphone.
We have a microphone
Not only we
coming.
hear better, but we also record it. But yeah, so it could be questions, comments.
It was a great privilege to work with Ron in Lear, and I had an amazing cast, including our dear friend over here. Take a wave.
Lola Pashalinski.
Who played Ken, and sitting next to Alisa, who was the dramaturg, and Karen Evans-Kendall, Ruth Malchuk, and Greg, who was up there.
Who was the fool? Who
Who
was
took an
amazing.
Obi as the fool. But I must say, I really wanted a Mississippi accent, and Ron was the only one that gave me a perfect one. He played Regan, and he was just brilliant, you know. Bill Raymond played Goneril, and who else?
Yeah, Izzy Monk.
Isabel Monk played
Gloucester.
Gloucester. It's a long time ago. But it was, and Pauline Oliveras did the music. So it was quite an exciting group of people to work with. But Ron was one of the stars. And it was just, I just want to pay homage a little bit. This was a great performance that I saw tonight. I never saw the complete tape. I saw a little bit of it over at Greg's at one time. But this was one of the greatest performances I've seen. And I've seen maybe, yeah, it ranks with the top 2 or 3 performances that I've seen. I think it's just a great piece of work. And from a directorial point of view, I think that Ron was brilliant in this piece. Absolutely brilliant. Believed everything. Was absolutely hilarious, and it was totally tragic. And it was a beautiful combination. He was a great actor. And it was a great loss. So I just want to say, bless you, Ron Vawter.
Anybody? Jill? Can you hand that mic to Jill Godmillo? Thank you.
Just briefly, Greg, you can answer this. I once read somewhere that Ron said that when he was growing up and realizing he was gay, there were only 2 public gay figures, two gays that he knew of, and one was Roy Cohn and the other was Jack Smith. Is that just wonderful legend?
Or 2 ways to be gay, I think.
Well, I don't think that's true, but
Such a good story.
I know when Ron moved to New York, he immediately contacted the Gay Liberation Front. So
Yeah.
those were gay people.
So is it is it true that he mixed in some of Jack Smith's ashes into his eyeshadow?
Yes, that's true.
That's true. I just want to say one other thing.
Not into the glitter.
The glitter. Yeah.
And,
Not the eyeshadow.
That Ron had 2 brilliant texts to perform, and he learned to perform texts with the Wooster Group and other work he did. But those, and they come from 2 different sources, and they were perfect. But somebody wrote that Jack Smith, that Roy Cohn, and Jack Smith wrote that other text, and every actor should have text like that to work with. You know, yeah.
Why don't we give you the microphone? No, we are recording.
We have a
it, so
microphone
we have
coming.
A microphone. 1 second. It's going to come right away.
Lola Pashalinski.
Thank you. This is just sort of on this, it's a side thing, just for point of information. Wasn't it true that Ron played Roy Cohn in the London production, the first London production of Angels in America?
No.
Am I imagining it? There was a big
There
Because
was
they were
interview in the
review-
Times. Is an interview in the Times?
yeah, there was a double interview in the
Yeah.
Times with Ron Vawter and Ron Liebman,
Right.
which they invited. I went to the thing. It was so crazy because
But-
Ron Liebman, like we were talking about, is a product. I guess he's dead now. Was a
he isn't.
product of total commercial
Yeah.
theater, and was doing, his version, so they asked them to speak about that. And I think
Yes.
Ron Liebman had done it in London
Yes,
before he was asked to do it here.
right.
And just on a side note, it's coming back to Broadway
Being
with
revived with
the famous
Nathan-
gay actor Nathan Lane.
Yeah. Right. I must, must
and-
the innocent suffer.
But
And the actor who played Roy Cohn in Citizen Cohn has just been accused of sexual harassment. Yeah.
I love that you have him out, Ed Koch. That's a great moment in the script.
I'm glad you clarified that for me.
Oh, but also
They did ask Ron after this, they asked him to play the engineer in Miss Saigon. So we went to, they gave us the ticket, the fabulous tickets to Miss Saigon, and then Ron wanted to leave during the first act. And I said, you can't leave, they gave you these tickets, you know, you have to at least sit through it. So, to replace Jonathan Pryce, you know, the original person.
I remember Jonathan Pryce came to see LSD, just the high points. I remember he was in the audience one night. I'm such a star fucker, really. But I remember that. And then you and Jonathan and Ron went out to dinner after. And it just so happened that I and a party of other people went out to dinner at the same place.
Yeah, no, it was a great success. It was, I think partially because it was so different than Ron's other work, that it attracted all, you know, this old audience, but also a new audience too. So yeah, that was very exciting.
I think, you know, one thing we didn't talk about was that it's, you know, and maybe this is part of why, I mean, people came to it because it was great and word got out and that's why people came. But I think also part of it is that it's a piece about, among other things, homophobia before AIDS. You know, it's very much of its moment and still very timely, unfortunately. But neither of the people he's representing, even though both of them died of AIDS, are in a moment, you know, they're represented at an earlier time. And what we come to understand about them has to do with the, and you use that disease imagery in the Roy Cohn text toward the end of homosexuality itself as a virus. And it just sort of speaks to that, you know, poison of that social poison.
Well, the parts that you're talking about, I put them in because the reaction to the epidemic initially was very much the same as the reaction to the gay rights bill, and it was couched in the same kind of language of contagion, infection, disease. Something you can catch.
I think we have time for one or two more questions, comments.
This is really a question for Greg because I think you'll remember about this thing that I can't quite remember. There was a really beautiful sort of behind-the-scenes making-of documentary about the tour of this show in Europe that German woman made.
Gea Kaltengener.
And once a year, the Segal Center has a festival of theater on film and video. And that was really never released beyond maybe a little festival circuit. But if someone could dig up a copy of that.
I have a copy.
Yeah,
this woman,
it's about
German documentary filmmaker, Gea Kaltengener, who unfortunately died some years ago. She just idolized Ron, and she she was European and she made these small European films. And so she said, oh, can I just follow you around on the European tour and make this film? So she did. It's called Free Fall. And it's a beautiful, she didn't shoot any of the performance. She only shot like backstage in the hotel. And rehearsals. Yeah, like no real, I think like 5 seconds. Someone opens a door and you see him on stage. But it wasn't about that. So, yeah, that's a good idea because it gives as you were saying, it was later and that was a very difficult tour for him and everyone involved. And so there's a lot of him like lying in bed in the hotel room, and she asks all these very simple questions, and he talks because he knew like this was this kind of last testament. So yeah, I'll look for that. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, maybe John, if you want to make a comment, and then John.
Do you want to, John? John Jezrin, after we did this show, there were 2 more projects that happened. I'll tell you about the last one first. The last one was, there were 3. After this, we decided, we'll do a play where, I directed Ron, he'll direct me. So we did this play that Lola was involved in called Queer and Alone, based on a novel by James Cormany. My name is, Jim Straw, sorry. My name is Desmond Farquhar, and that is my real name. I just hate it when people change their names all the time, don't you? That was the opening. We did that at the kitchen. Then we did this play, Ron did this play, Philoctetes. It was 3 different versions. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but it was, I think, Sophocles, André Gide, and then Ron commissioned John Jezrin to write the 3rd adaptation of the ancient myth of Philoctetes, who gets bitten by a snake and is exiled to an island where he's tormented. So, John, can you talk about that experience?
Just a little bit, but I did want to just say that it is interesting. I think Jill was saying this kind of connection between the writer and the actor. So that it is kind of important that Ron was able to pull this stuff out of the writers. He seemed to have some kind of radar of what he wanted to get, and so he was able to persuade me to write this. I did not want to write a Greek anything at that point, and basically it was he kind of said, well, it doesn't have to really be a Greek. Just write a play and we'll call it Philoctetes kind of idea. So that it was that kind of a way of pulling material, not by dictating it to me or anything like that, but there's a great connection between actors and writers that people don't talk about, and in a way they don't even talk about it. Is this kind of this osmosis and a connection in what one thinks the other one might be able to do. This was a completely, idea completely came out of the blue. And then I thought, oh my God, now Gary Indiana's written this great thing, and I have to write a Greek play. So what am I going to do? So anyway, I just think it's important to remember there's this very interesting connection. So that's kind of how, my play came about. And also, it also had to be done very, very quickly. There was a kind of a time limit, which I think Ron was very honest about. He said, this is it. Who knows? So I had to sort of work on it quickly and sort of under a cloud. And but anyway, so that's kind of how that happened. And he did, I think he had a great connection to I mean, you can say, to language that it was important. And I think, yeah, some of it did come out of his work with the Wooster Group. He certainly had a lot of great language, but I also think, to his credit, he you know, keeps the writer on their toes. You know, it cannot be less than, you know, he can do for you. So I was, you know, thrilled with that. So anyway, yeah, that's
One more
John,
person.
I just want to say something that I just want to ask John something, actually, because I was thinking the whole time we were watching this that we were all operating under the strangest constraints and weirdness, because we didn't rush developing Roy Cohn. We didn't. And we knew that Ron could die any time. And it was one of the stranger things was that the project, we had such perfectionistic wishes for it that we refused to, you know, I mean, it took a year to develop it. And during that year is, I think, when, correct me if I'm wrong, in the parlance of the time, that Ron he went from being HIV positive
Well,
to
it was officially diagnosed.
yeah. I think actually after the performances started,
No, before.
before.
But maybe
But
not
the-
publicly.
But it was a weird, it was just very strange.
Yeah, no, it was, well, that was the thing. I mean, it wasn't just us. There were many people in the theater who were, you know, designers, all kinds of people who were like, well, I want to work. I mean, I'm sick, but I want to work. So, like, you would go to work and then, like, oh, that person, you know. And then the next day you'd be like, oh, that person died. And you're like, what? But then after a while, it became, I mean, you know, as... you know, there'd be like 50 people you knew who died, or 100 people you knew who died. And then every day you'd read about people and you go, oh, Michael Bennett, oh, yeah. And so, yeah, so I mean, I'm sure a lot of...
No, but in this case, if the actor had died, there wouldn't have been any play.
Right.
So...
This was before... No, it never opened. That's what I mean. They did a couple of performances, and then he couldn't do it. So after that, we took a train. We got a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation to go to, what's it called? Bellagio in Lake Como. And we worked on the final thing we ever worked on, which was called Dark Victory, which included all these parts of novels like Brothers Karamazov and Uncle Tom's Cabin, and all these scenes where a dying person, 2 scenes. It was for me and Ron. We said, you directed me, I directed you, now we'll work together. And Susan Sontag was the director. And it was all these 2 scenes, and we alternated between the person who's dying and the caretaker person. But when we got to Bellagio, that was it. He couldn't do anymore and had to go in the hospital, and then he just wanted to go back to New York. So we got on the plane, and he died on the plane going back to New York.
Yeah, I was thinking that might be a good moment to go over. It's already,
Yep.
it is past
I
9,
know. What?
and,
Yes?
I have one question. Where was Ron from and what was his background? He's so amazing.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if she's here. There's a new biography coming out of him by this author named Teresa. Oh, hi. So maybe you should ask her. But okay, I think that's enough, and we're going to have a short reception now.
Yeah, again, thank you.
Thank you.
All, for coming, and thank you for being here. And thank you. We will have a reception. Thank you.